Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This book is called Love and Jello. It's written by Matt Reifenberg and Kathy Roden Gogan. This is the second part of a three-part series. Its ISBN is 978-1-71677-925-1. It's paperback. Library of Congress number is 202-0912349. This is one of Matt and Kathy's latest book. I think you really enjoyed it. It's a good read. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to read the next 30 pages, which will take about an hour. I left off on, well, I'll pick up on page 40, and I'll go ahead and read the next 40 pages. Love and Jello, page 40. Went along. I didn't know any of them. Well, we all sat outside talking, and it was good to see him. We exchanged numbers, and he was going to call me so we could go to dinner or something, but he never did. Well, Wayne began before shushed by Faith. That's about all I know, Matt said. I found out he was here in Kentucky from my oldest brother during dinner one night. He was in a nursing home near my brother's house for a time. After collapsing on the street one day and during his treatment and recovery, it was decided he couldn't return to his third floor apartment because he could climb the stairs. How he got here to Kentucky, I still don't know. I know he was trying to find a new place to live, but not having much luck. Everyone seated at the table was quiet a bit, reflecting on this new information about their friend Bud. Excuse me. What do you know about his life other than his medical issues, Matt? Carol asked. Always curious about knowing people's backstories. As a writer, she found things like this very interesting. Well, I can tell you a lot about his younger years. I know when he was sort of a nurse and orderly in France during World War II. From there, I assume he came home, and I heard he drove a school bus. He met my mother then. She was a student of his bus, I think. He was a bit older than her, so you can guess how that all that happened. They got married and had four of us boys. My earliest memory of him is sitting in a lawn chair drinking cheap beer and smoking Camels unfiltered. I know he worked for a while driving a forklift at a cold storage facility and was a supervisor at a company that made scaffolding. Someone told me that they made scaffolding that was used to refurbish a Statue of Liberty years ago. He rode a motorcycle for years and had a long white ponytail at some point. He spent a lot of time at the local diner in the small town he lived in. Other than that, a love for scratch off tickets and NASCAR, I don't know a whole lot. He had his long hair when he got here, Alice said, smiling. He cut it off soon after arriving. Wayne absentmindedly rubbed his bald head. Ain't had hair in dog's years. Wayne, how about you? I take you for a ride in the Mercedes tomorrow. Matt suddenly breaking the sad mood. Wayne looked up and smiled. Hell yeah. Chapter 6 Love and Jello Car Troubles. Don Don pulled into in the usual parking place at the Goodwill store. He was in a bad mood and a little hungover from the vodka he had the night before. He carried a newspaper and a coffee in his hand. He still had not resolved the apartment issue with management. He needed to talk to that whack job of Ruth and convince her to clean his place and get on with getting others on board by bribing them with pizza. Doing it himself still wasn't an option in his mind if he could coerce someone else into doing it for him. Ruth felt it was God's work to clean up the world, and God had called her to do it, or such nonsense that she spouted whenever she felt anyone would listen. Don thought she was just crazy, well delusional for his 4 years of Psych 101 at Henry Ford High was to be believed. Don entered the store and took his post in a custom place and unfolded the paper. The usual drivel about the governor's race this year, UK football, crimes of all sorts, and occasional amusing story were all the same yesterday's news about the only thing occasionally changed in the small town, the death of some residents, stupidity. When he read the paper and was scanning the classifieds, one particular event made him laugh out loud. Mary, who was working nearby, looked at Don and said, "Did you ever hear about the memorial garden at the manor?" Page 43, Love and Jello. Mary sighed, thinking Don was about to laugh into one of the tiads about the government or religion that he like seemed to like giving. "No, Don, I haven't heard of it," Mary said finally. It was a couple years ago on the side of the patio at the manor in the small garden that was tended to each year by a little Filipino guy named Juan. I think he was really from the Philippines or Vietnam or something, I'm not sure, but every year he planted a garden and grew stuff for the people at the manor. He would plant all winter, plant a lot of stuff in the spring, and by early summer we were knee deep in some of the best veggies you ever had. Green beans, peppers, and the like, and tomatoes. Oh, they were the best. So good in a salad or a sandwich. Beat the hell out of the ones at the farmer's market, too. Anyway, that year he planted the garden as the first plants were poking up out of the ground. Oh, one up and died one day. Poor bastard just kneeled over in the radishes. That impassable Wayne told us to. Mary laughed at Don's impersonation of Wayne, whom she had never met. Anyway, some of the residents got together and decided since the garden was already planted, they decided to the memory of poor old Juan. Somehow the press got a hold of the story and a local news station did a piece on it. A TV truck showed up and these idiots got on TV. Page 44, Love and Jello, saying how much they loved Juan and wanted to honor him by dedicating the garden in his name. A real feel good story to share with the rest of central Kentucky, Don said, rolling his eyes. I vaguely remember something about it, Mary, trying to recall the details. So, anyway, time goes by, the plants are growing, but not so well as when Juan did it. The owners of the manor were happy that the manor was featured on TV, so they made arrangements to return with the TV crew and do a follow up story late summer. The residents didn't know anything about it, so the big day arrives. The owners show up, and we all had no idea that they were black, first of all. It was surprising, how racist this area can be, Don said. Mary agreed. It's one of the sad facts of this place. Anyway, Don continued. A family of five shows up in a Cadillac Escalade and piles out of their nice clothes, followed by the TV crew. They were interviews, lots of smiles, and a festive mood. They had the little memorial garden. When they arrived at the patio, the only thing they see is a bunch of weeds and a half-eaten head of lettuce. Ha ha, it was so funny, their faces. Well, when the residents were later asked why no one had taken care of the garden, someone replied, "Well, it's hot out, so bunch of dumbasses." Page 45, Love and Jello. Don laughed until he couldn't anymore, and Mary had to admit it was pretty funny. Poor old Mr. Juan, she said. After telling the memorial garden story, Don felt a little better. The coffee had helped some as well to lessen the hangover. He decided he needed to drink less, which he had said on more than a few occasions lately. He didn't know why he had been drinking more recently, really. Stress, boredom, and general funk had pushed him further into the path of drinking more than he normally did. He could stop at any time if he wanted to, couldn't he? A few minutes later, Don got up to stretch his legs and walk back to the store to see new arrivals. As he walked into the storage area, he could hear Mary talking on her cell phone. "Yes, I'll be there. I can't get there until this afternoon, but we'll be there. I understand. Thank you. Have a good day." Don saw the worried look on Mary's face. "Everything okay, Mary?" "Oh, hi. Yes, everything is fine. Just some car trouble I need to get fixed," Mary replied. "Not sure how I'm going to pay for it, but I need my car." For page 46. Love it, Jello. School and come here. I just barely scraping and by the car breaks down. It seems like stuff never ends. "Well, if you need a sugar daddy to take care of you, let me know," Don laughed. "Don, unless you want to leave here today with your testicles in a Ziploc baggie, I suggest you get away from me right now." Mary was a bit repulsed by the idea of Don thinking he could talk to her like this. Don just laughed and watched her walk away. His mind briefly imagined the color of her panties. He shook his head and chided himself for that thought, remembering how things had got him trouble before. He wasn't going down that road again. Better get your head out of your ass, Don, he said to himself, recalling events of the years past. When Don had left home shortly, he graduated. He found himself working at a truck stop in some town off the interstate. Interestingly enough, this was the same truck stop that his future co-worker from the Goodwill store, Mary, would disappear from years later. Her car would be found abandoned in the sprawling lot of the truck stop with a few clues. Page 47, Love and Jello. Her whereabouts found. The mystery of her disappearance would remain so for years. Being regulated to the local police cold case file, it would take 12 years and other mysterious disappearances, with the only common denominator being the truck stop for the police to realize there was a potential serial killer loose in the area. Dubbed the truck stop killer, it would be any more years into the case of Mary's disappearance, along with 13 other young women, was solved. When the killer's identity was revealed, it was created shockwaves that reverberated in the little corner of the state for months to come. The trucks would come in parts unknown, and Don would fill them with diesel while drivers grabbed some food in the stores and next to the filling station. There was also a little motel on the property where Don was staying at the moment while he saved some money and figured out his next move. The job was easy, I bet boring, and when Don was not working, he would wander to the garage there to occasionally help out the guys with repairs and go to the store for coffee. He would always talk a bit with the girls working behind the counter before heading back to his room. One of them in particular seemed to have an interest in him, and Don found himself talking with her more as the long days on. Diana was younger than Don by a couple of years and was finishing high school. She was pretty and worked at the truck stop part time to make, page 48, Love and Jello, extra money for college. She had dreams of leaving this small town and moving to New York and working in a law firm after college. In an odd twist of fate, she would years later return to the small town to take care of her ailing parents and end up working at the same truck stop after unfulfilling career working as a reception at the legal aid office in a suburb of New York. Don and Diana would take a lot and eventually started taking breaks together. Eventually, Don asked her to see a movie, which she agreed. Although neither of them could recall the movie, they did enjoy each other's company, stopping for ice cream, and talking was a highlight of the evening for both. When Don dropped her off at her house, the conversation dwindled and wondered who would kiss whom first, as their attraction to each other had grown to this point over time. It was Diana who felt finally leaned close to Don and brushed her lips against Don's. From there, passion took over, and both were lost in the desire for each other. Both were taken by surprise when the door to Don's car was yanked open and Diana's father pulled her out of the car. Diana, what the hell you doing? He yelled as he pulled her out. Daddy, stop it, Diana pleaded. After page 49, Love and Jello. After yanking her out, he stuck his head in the car, sneering at Don. Don't you go nowhere, boy. The police are on their way. Don was confused and scared, never had been in this situation before. Police? What? Why? Don stammered, not quite understanding and somewhat embarrassed. Diana's father raised his voice louder. She's only 16. That makes her a minor, and you are not. You know what that means, boy. 16? What? Wait, we didn't. I mean, Don traded off as the serious of the situation began to dawn on him, and his mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Get in the house, girl. I'll deal with you shortly, Diana's father said. The police car pulled behind stone cars with the lights flashing and a spotlight shining brightly through the back window. Page 50, Love and Jello. Hi, Bill. What's the problem? The officer said. This piece of shit tried to rape my daughter, Diana's father said. Daddy, he didn't, Diana said before her father slapped and told her to be quiet. I came out here and found him forcing his hand down her pants, Diana's father said, his voice rising. Sir, let me see some ID, the officer said. We didn't, I wasn't, Don started to protest while reaching for his wallet. The officer took his ID and looked it briefly before shining his flashlight in Don's face. Sir, please step out of the vehicle. Don got out and the officer searched for weapons and placed him in handcuffs. Don's mind raced and he could not grasp what was happening. Love and Jello, page 51. I didn't do anything, Don said to the officer. I think you need to come with me so we can sort this out, the officer said. I'm being arrested, Don asked. Not sure what the officer was saying. We will take you to the station to get this sorted out. The girl is underage and you are not. Shit, was Don's only thought as he led to the cruiser and put in his back. What followed was a blur of questions, accusations, and embarrassment for Don. No matter how he tried to maintain his innocence in the matter, no one believed him. Ultimately, he spent 2 nights in jail where he was subject to punches being thrown by others who were being held, as well as some rough treatment from the guards in the jail. In the end, he was let go because Diana was able to convince her father that nothing happened, so he didn't press charges. When Don returned to the motel after retrieving his car, which was towed by an impound lot, there was a note from the management of the truck stop that he was fired and had to leave the motel immediately. He turned out that Diana's father, page 52, Love and Jello, was well connected in the town and had seen that it was Don wasn't going to be sticking around. There was to be no mistaking the power Diana's father had, and to make it clear as Don drove out of town, he was stopped by the same policeman from the night he was arrested. They were on somewhat deserted road when Don waited to see what he wanted. Another car pulled up behind the police car in his rearview mirror. Don saw Diana's father get out of the car and approach Don's car. He knew this wasn't going to go well for him. The swelling and bruises from the punches Don took as a police officer looked or went away a week or so. The bad taste Don had for law enforcement, corruption, and the overbearing parents lasted much longer. As the father's car pulled away, Don saw, though eyes halfway swollen shut, that Diana was crying in the passenger seat. As Mary threatened to do Don's testicular harm, Wayne was cruising up the highway somewhere north of town and mad at the wheel of the car. Wayne was beginning to like the car more and more. He said he had always been an American car guy, but this one, German descent, was amazing. The engineering, fit, and finish of this car was light years ahead of Wayne's loud, snarling muscle cars from years past. It was just so smooth, enough power to push you back in the comfortable leather seats and keep you there until you slow down. The world going by in a blur of colors and sound. Page 53, Love and Jello. Wayne had driven and ridden in my cars many years, but nothing like this. Woo! He yelled as the car picked up speed effortlessly. Matt smiled and pressed the gas pedal further, passing cars at a very rapid pace. He was concentrating on his driving and keeping an eye out for the police, but happily to be feeling the wind in his hair and the sun on his face. He could see Wayne out of the corner of his eye and knew he was enjoying the drive a lot as well. After a bit, Matt slowed and took the next exit. He turned left and drove a bit until he found a Dairy Queen, where he pulled in and stopped. He jumped out of the car and said, "Come on, Wayne, I'm buying." "Well, I ain't ever been one to turn down ice cream," Wayne laughed as he jumped out, followed Matt inside, and stood looking at the menu, trying to decide what to get. He wanted it all, but realized he would be sick if he ate too much, so he settled on an Oreo Blizzard. Matt ordered and paid for their ice cream as Wayne began a dialogue about the car and talked about amazingly fast it is. He was excited for sure, and Matt smiled and listened. Page 54, Love and Jello. Quietly, happily to give Wayne a good experience and shift his mind off on everything for a brief time. Matt hadn't had the car that long and had purchased it on a whim a few days before the uh, circuitous route to Kentucky had begun. A lucky streak in the stock option market had provided him enough money to purchase the car and had not worked for a while. He normally would be so carefree with his time or money, but a health scare of his own a few years early taught him that life is indeed short and he needed to enjoy it while he could. Until recently, he had not had the time or the money but had finished the last project he is working on and hitting the big time with his investments. He could now afford some time off and make sure he enjoyed it. The car spoke to him when he saw it at the dealership. He had driven it in his Jeep, and no one paid any attention to him that day. Salesman ignored him since he was dressed in jeans and an old Kennedy Space Center t-shirt. When he wandered into the showroom, most of the sales team didn't even look up. That suited Matt fine as he hated high-pressured sales tactics and preferred to be on the left alone to look at what he wanted to see. Matt walked through the showroom and finally found the AMG. He walked around it, admiring the clean lines of graphite color. The top was down and he took a good long look at the interior. He opened the door and sat behind the wheel as he was getting out. A younger salesman, page 55, loving Jello, came up and asked if he liked it. Matt knew this young man was probably the most junior salesman who was sent to this customer that others felt were not going to be able to afford the car they were looking at. And I'll be back in just a few minutes right after that. I'm taking a break and I will be back. Page 55 continued, loving Jello. Matt had asked Zach, the junior salesman, the price of the car. Zach stammered a little and almost apologetically quoted a price somewhere north of 100,000. Matt asked what his commission would be on a sale like that. Zach responded, it seemed reasonable, although in truth it was more than Matt had ever spent on anything, much less a car. Zach, I want you to get to your sales manager for me, Zach said. Zach hurried over to a desk and occupied by three salesmen and the sales manager, who was busy talking and laughing. Zach spoke to the manager, who stood up, put on his suit jacket, and all eyes followed him and Zach back to where Matt stood next to the car. Is there a problem, sir? Inquired the manager. No problem. I was just discussing this car with Zach here, and he was telling me the commissions he would make on this sale like this. I have two checks in my pocket, one I'll write for the car and the other for Zach's commission. I just wanted to make sure this was agreeable to you. Provided we can agree that you can increase his commission to 10% of the purchase price. Matt said as he winked at Zach. The sales manager blinked and, to his credit, didn't flustered by the request. Provided this is a legitimate purchase, we can verify with your bank. We can accommodate your request. 2 hours later, as Matt walked out with Zach, he passed the table with three salesmen who looked at a bit glum, having missed out on a huge sale. Matt stopped and looked at each of them in turn. Leaning on the table, he said quietly, had one of you fine gentlemen done your job and paid attention to a customer like me, you'd be celebrating a big commission rather than Zach here, dumbasses. He walked out of the sun of the warm Tuesday afternoon. Wayne had finished his ice cream and managed to get only a little out of his shirt. Matt smiled and said, I'll say it. Page 57, loving Jello. Wayne nodded and they headed back to the car. Wayne, want to drive? Want to drive, Wayne? Oh, yeah, Wayne yelled. Matt smiled at Wayne's excitement. His smile held a tiny bit of sadness knowing it would probably be the last time Wayne ever got to test drive a fast car. Chapter 7, Love and Jello, Waiting for Robert, page 58. Pauline was finishing last of her packing. She had spent the last week getting plastic totes and filling them with clothes, kitchen items, and various knickknacks she wouldn't need for a while. Her living room was filled with totes of various sizes, and she meticulously packed one each to capacity. Today was the big day. Her suitcases were packed, and she was ready to leave the manor finally. She had missed her sister Nadine, who lived just down the hall, but this day was the beginning of what might be her last chance at happiness, so she needed to take it. Meeting Robert online a year ago by chance started with some mild flirting and grew to the point she was today. He was on his way to pick her up and took her back to Texas with him. She was so excited and could not stop smiling. She had made the rounds at the manor earlier saying goodbyes. Her apartment would have a new resident after it was painted next week. Pauline couldn't care less and she'd be happy in the Texas starting a new life with Robert. Love and Jello, page 59. Robert was an old oil field worker, and while she might miss him, he was on the rig. There would be a lot of time spent together when he was home. She would be busy settling into her new life anyway. She had grown to care a lot for Robert, and 3 days they spent in Nashville. A few months later, they met one of the happiest times of their life. He spent days exploring the city and the nights together, exploring each other. It was the first time she had spent time with another man since her husband of 25 years, Jeff, had left her and started living with a woman half his age. At 64, Pauline was on the downside of looking pretty, if the truth be told. The lines on her face had been earned by years of stressful job as a corporate attorney, a mother of two, and wife to the cheating husband, Jeff. When they divorced, she had tried to make it amicable, but Jeff was being unfair, so she got everything as part of the settlement. He should have taken the settlement that was offered, but instead decided wanted everything. She had divorced him with enough to take care of herself the rest of her days. So she sold the vacation house, bought a new car, and moved to this small town to get away from the craziness of city life. Robert was younger, having just turned 47, but found Pauline sexy and desirable. He made her feel special, and she felt loved in all of his emails, texts, and she could easily hear the love for her in his voice when they were able to talk on the phone. He was not without his issues financially, though. Pauline had helped him first with some of the small things, a car repair here and there, and finally had sent him a significant amount for him to page 60, Love and Jello, rent an apartment for them, as well as buy some furniture. He was coming today to take her to the new home. She couldn't wait to see that he had picked out for them. She had asked to see photos of the new place, but he insisted on surprising her. Pauline found this element of surprise exciting. Pauline had not heard from him yet this day, but attributed to him driving in possibly horrific traffic. He was supposed to be there by 5 p.m., and it was barely noon, so he had plenty of time to finish the myriad of tasks that needed to be done and the occasional talk with whoever might stop in to wish her well. Their plan for him was to pick her up, have some dinner, and spend the night at a hotel before getting on the road to their new life in the next morning. It had been 7 months since she had Robert aside for a weekly Skype call, and she wanted to be in his arms, look into his eyes, and be able to touch him in person. For her part, Pauline's sister Nadine was very skeptical of the younger man. What would he want with a woman almost 20 years of his senior? Don't be jealous, Pauline said when Nadine tried to talk to her sister and advised her to go slower, to no avail. While she was rooting for her sister and for things to work out for Pauline, there was a vague sense of something being odd about Robert. She couldn't place what it was, but she was suspicious. Nadine wasn't sure if it was the fact that she had heard and read so many horror stories about online dating, or maybe she was a tiny bit jealous. Or page 61, loving Jello. Or she didn't seem what to see her sister heard. In the end, she had decided to just what to just see what developed and try to make Pauline be a little cautious. On the surface, it appeared that Robert loved Pauline from everything she had told her and pictures she had seen of them together, but still, there was a nagging doubt. At 3 p.m., Pauline called Robert's cell and it went straight to voicemail. Hi, honey. I wanted to check in and see how you were doing. You're only 2 hours away and I can't wait to see you. Call me back when you can. Love you. See you soon. Pauline's excitement was growing with each passing minute. Soon she would be with Robert again, and she wasn't letting him go. Nadine would soon see that her needless worries and questions and prying into the couple's relationship were for nothing. At 4 p.m., Pauline took her suitcases and a few other items she would need to the lobby of the building and waited. If Robert was early, she wanted to be ready. She texted Robert and said she was ready and waiting. He didn't respond, but she didn't expect him to. Page 62, Love and Jello. At 5 p.m., the excitement in Pauline's body was too much, so she started pacing and walking around along the sidewalk in front of the building, not wanting to miss Robert's arrival. She greeted people as she walked, laughing and joking with a few, bidding them farewell again. At 5:30, Pauline called Robert's cell again, and it went straight to voicemail as it had earlier. Honey, where are you? I'm waiting, Pauline said. She was starting to worry that something might have happened, but felt sure he would be there in a minute. All the planning and waiting would be over soon enough. She was still overly excited and continued to pace in the early evening sun. Nadine walked out and gave Pauline a bottle of water. Girl, you're going to wear out that sidewalk if you don't stop. Robert got delayed, huh? Yes, I called him a minute ago and he didn't answer. Probably stuck in traffic. You want to come inside and wait in the air conditioning? It's still pretty hot out, Nadine offered. No, I want to be out here when he shows up, Pauline said and smiled. Page 63, Love and Jello. Okay, suit yourself. Come on, and if you get too hot, shoo, I'm about to burn up. Got some dinner on the stove, so I got to get back in. Pauline watched her go, wondering when the next time she'd see her sister. She was going to miss her, but Robert was almost there, and her new life was about to start. At 6:30, Pauline knew something was wrong. He couldn't have run into that much traffic. The construction on the highway was a pain and never seemed to end, but that would not delay him that much. He was now an hour and a half late, and she had received no word from him. Where are you, honey? Pauline said to herself. People were walking by asking the same thing, and Pauline was coming frustrated with all the questions. He was coming. He got delayed, stuck in traffic, got a late start. Well, were all the answers gave to various people. At 6:45, her phone lit up with a text. It was from Robert. Pauline's lit up too. Finally, an answer from him, and she knew she'd know when he was arriving. The text was only 3 words, but they would change the course of Pauline's life forever. She read the text and reread it, not understanding what he was saying at first. Finally, it slowed down. It dawned on her. The words washing over, and the realization of what they meant becoming clearer in her mind as a fog lifting and revealing the scene in front of her. Pauline stared at her screen. I'm not coming. The words burned to her brain like a hot poker. What? She screamed. She dilated Robert's cell again and it went to voicemail. Robert, where are you? Is this some sort of sick joke? What do you mean you aren't coming? Please call me. I love you, she pleaded into the phone. Her mind raced. Not coming flashed over and over in her head. He's not coming today. She would make sense out of it. She paced back and forth, although what this could mean. Comprehension seemed impossible at the moment. Pauline continued walking. Nadine watched from her kitchen window. She could tell something was wrong with her sister. She didn't know what might have happened, but decided to go. She sat down and pulled her sneakers on. The big green pickup made its way down the street, traveling at 5 miles over the posted limit. The driver, a 17-year-old, was talking on his phone to his girlfriend, making plans for the oncoming weekend. He saw the woman walk into the street from his passenger's side too late, and saw her look up from her phone a second or two before the truck bumper contacted her left leg. The boy slammed on the brakes and watched as the woman was thrown forward from the impact. She rolled to stop 20 feet from her truck, her leg at an odd angle, her cell phone another 20 feet from her. Wayne had enjoyed driving the car so much he and Erling was his adrenaline was still high, and as he and Matt pulled into Walmart and as Wayne called it, Matt had directed him there after a high-speed run down the interstate and a nice dinner of fried catfish at the Crackabara. Matt wanted to pick up some cleaning supplies for the car as well as his dad's apartment. The wail of an ambulance siren caught Wayne's attention as he watched the meat wagon, as he called it, pass on its way toward town. The pair continued inside and hunted for the purchases. Matt even bought Wayne a couple of new shirts to replace some of the more stained ones he had seen Wayne wear. Wayne liked the younger man and getting to drive the car that was fast as the devil with his ass on fire was the highlight in a long period of boredom for Wayne. When they turned into the street where the manor was and saw the flashing lights and ambulance, Matt pulled over and they got out. A crowd from the manor surrounding houses and gathered to watch the scene before him. Nothing drew a crowd faster than sirens and flashing lights. Page 66, Love and Jello. Wondering what the fuss was about, Wayne as they hopped out of the car. Wayne walked up to the tape strung across the road and asked Eddie who who he saw first was going on. He could see a young man crying and talking to a police officer, and distraught Nadine talking to another officer while he took notes. Pauline got hit by that truck, at that there truck, he said. Lord Almighty, Wayne said quietly. The paramedics were working on Pauline's leg and other injuries. He could see Pauline was moving a little and obviously in pain. Wayne's first instinct was go to her and make sure she was all right. He walked around along the tape and Matt followed when they were as close as they could get to Pauline. Wayne whispered to Matt, I need to get over there to talk to her. Matt started to protest, but the look in Wayne's eyes made him nod at the older man and raised tape for him to go under. Matt followed. The officer noticed the two men walking toward the woman, now being loaded on the stretcher. He went after the younger of the two, trying to stop their advance. Matt engaged the officer while Wayne went to Pauline and took her hand in his, which she accepted, graceful to see a familiar face. Hello, Wayne, Pauline said through a half-closed eye. She seemed a bit out of it, but Wayne wasn't sure if it was due to shock or the drugs the paramedics had just given her. Sir, please step back, one of the paramedics said, was promptly ignored by Wayne. You okay, Pauline? You look a fright, Wayne replied. I'll be okay if they tell me. It might be tough to walk for a while, but she said okay. She had said tears welled up in her eyes. Oh, Wayne, I'm so stupid. Robert's not coming. Wayne looked at the woman before him and felt pain she did. She could see in her eyes that he was devastated and in pain it would be difficult to overcome. Page 68, Love and Jello. I gave up my apartment and everything for him. I'm so stupid, Pauline cried. You just hush now. Don't worry about that. You'll need all you'll need to get yourself fixed up, and when you get feeling better, we'll have a nice long talk about this business of that fella, Wayne said, smiling at Pauline. If you need a place to stay when you get sprung from the big house, you'll come and see me, Wayne assured her. I've watched you over the past year, and we've become good friends. I got to say, mighty sad to say you're going to leave. I kind of got a little sweet on you, Wayne said, pausing to gather his thoughts. Maybe it's bad timing and all, but I'm pretty simple, man, and I ain't got much to offer a woman like you, but I'd be happy if you'd let me try. Now to get that leg fixed up and get back here. Pauline smiled as Wayne leaned down to kiss her lightly on the lips. As Pauline drifted off, She knew one part of her life had ended in that evening on the street, and maybe another one had possibly begun. Wayne walked back where Matt had been pushing through the yellow tape as the stretcher was loaded to the ambulance and smiled. You okay, buddy? Matt said. Best day ever, Wayne grinned in reply. That ends chapter 7. I'm going to be reading chapter 8 on page 69 when I come back from my break. And I'll be back. I'll be back soon. I'm going to take about a 2 or 3 minute break and I'll be back. Chapter 8 Love and Jello, page 69. News travels fast at the manor. Within minutes of the ambulance with Pauline pulling out of the end of the road, the residents began to whisper about Wayne kissing her before she was loaded into the back. Some smiled and laughed about how sweet it was. Wayne was generally thought of as a nice guy and was in truth as harmless as he was simple. Most of the residents had spent time with Wayne at some event that involved food because he was rarely without something. He was either eating or trying to get food into his hands so he could devour it. Two residents in particular were not impressed by Wayne's latest escapade, but for different reasons. Later that night, Don had heard the rumor floating around about the events earlier in the evening. He had seen what happened because he was in his apartment with a glass of vodka and had little interest in socializing at the time. He had wandered out after the hoopla and subsided in hearing the whole story from Eddie. He was grumbling about something. That idiot Wayne. Currently, he was back in his apartment, brooding about life in general. He was a bit unhappy, probably more so because he had been drinking all the afternoon. He looked around the disheveled apartment again and sighed. He needed to get his place cleaned up soon because the date for his stupid management people to start eviction processes was looming like a giant shadow over him. The constant reminder from those idiots were page 70, Love and Jello. Not helping. Don had mentioned in passing to Eddie's crazy girlfriend, Ruth, that he needed some help with a few things, but aside from having to listen to a long sermon about her doing the Lord's work and her being chosen by God to help clean up the world, she hadn't said whether she would either help either way. It had to take a new track if he was going to get her to clean the place up in time. Maybe he better go off going with his plan B and buying pizza for the rest of the residents to get them to help. He thought briefly of asking that younger girl, Mary, at the Goodwill store if she was interested in doing it for a few bucks, but they had not been talking much since the last incident where she had threatened him. Probably not a good idea, so Don sighed and looked around again. He pushed his newspaper off the arm of his chair and onto and ready covered the floor. Faith was in her apartment when she had heard the sirens outside. She went to the window and opened the blinds to see what happened, but the ambulance had parked in such a way that the scene was blocked. She closed the blinds and went back to her chair. Her legs had been bothering her a lot, and the doctor had told her to keep them elevated as much as possible. The medication she was on had caused her legs to swell, The doctor had suggested that she spend time at the big house to help her legs stop swelling, but she ignored that advice. She knew that if she had ended up there, who knew when she would return home? If at all, she laid back in the recliner. She checked on her iPad and looked at Facebook for her daughter Carol posted another song challenge, and Faith was determined to come up with a good answer so she didn't get it gonged again by that asshat Mike who had appointed himself the captain of the Gong Police. Love and Jello, page 71. The challenge was to post a song with the number of the title. Faith thought about this for a few minutes and finally posted Three Little Birds by Bob Marley. She smiled when the moments later Asshat Mike had replied to her post saying, Good job. Faith smiled, but not because of the compliment. At that moment, nothing Mike said mattered. Her mind was fixated on listening to Bob Marley with Don's months earlier while eating Jello together. For Don's part, he would spend time with her, taking her about whatever came to mind, as he would bring her little presents every time he came over. They spent time listening to music. Don tended to like things like Bob Dylan, Bob Marley. They watched TV a lot at night and sat on the couch together eating Jello with milk. It was an odd combination, just like them, but once you got used to it, it's pretty good, Faith agreed. Her smile slowly faded as she came back to the reality of now. Faith hadn't talked to Don in a couple of months. His silence and indifference toward her made her sad. She didn't understand why he was ignoring her issue of Debbie and not Faith directly. She had replayed their last conversation many times in her mind and could not understand how anything she said would keep keep him away from her. When she encountered him in the common area and said hello to him, we would generally just grunt. He would generally just grunt or say nothing in response. This hurt her more since there were no reason for him to be so cold to her. She had been good to Don when they were spending time together, having given him her. Page 72. Love and Jello. Debit card just to use a few times, as well as her late husband's old cell phone, which had driven Carol crazy. Faith was still holding on to all the Jello he had purchased as well in the hope that he would return home for it someday. A knock at the door snapped Faith temporarily out of her sadness of reminiscing about Don. Come in, Faith called. Debbie with an eye rushed in, dropped bags of groceries on the counter. Sorry it took so long to get back. Do you see what happened? Debbie with an eye asked. Excuse me. No, this stupid ambulance was on the way, Faith replied, somewhat annoyed. The Lord works in mysterious ways, with Debbie replied as she started unpacking the bags and smiling to herself. She loved a happy story. Page 73, Love and Jello. Well, are you going to fill me in or leave me sitting here like an idiot? Faith said, growing more annoyed. Debbie with an eye relayed the story as she heard it while she opened cabinets in the refrigerator to put the rest of the groceries away. She finished by saying, and, and then he leaned down and kissed her passionately. Faith laughed at the image of Wayne and Pauline kissing like some star-crossed lover at the end of a cheesy romantic movie. She had considered Wayne as a potential suitor at one point, but after the meeting dawned, she decided Wayne was not too intelligent. Faith was drawn to Don's intelligence and felt he was a good match for her in this regard. Faith sighed, her thoughts drawn back to Don again, almost against her will, as much as an ass he was being toward her. She still missed him. Faith's thoughts wandered between being upset and missing him terribly to wanting to make a giant batch of Jello and dump it on him. He could be so infuriating at times. No one seemed to understand the attraction to Don, but in Faith's mind he was so delightful. She saw the good in him to most was easily overlooked that he made her feel special. Even his nickname for her made her heart flutter. Fago, 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 he would always say to her when he saw her. To most it was just a silly name, but he had explained that he saw her as a combination of different things, such as sunshine and hurricane, sweet and salty. The name Fago, also a drink manufactured in Detroit, had the most flavors of any soda, and reminded Don of her. That explanation meant that the world to her, as did he. Page 74, Love and Jello. Dawn could also be annoying to her at times. It once referred to as pseudo-intellectual. Faith didn't understand what it meant right away, and Dawn told her to look it up. She got out her iPad. Why don't you spell it, Mr. Smarty Pants? Faith said sarcastically. S-U-D. No, wait. S-O-O. No, that's not either. Dawn said, now unsure of himself. Don thought and finally admitted he didn't know how to spell it either. After a few attempts, Faith finally asked Alexa what it meant, her eyes going wide at the answer. Alexa's answer had made Faith mad, and Don felt quirky after what to do to avoid Faith's ear. It took a week or two, but he finally returned. This last argument, if Don close to that, had resulted in Don not returning, and left Faith confused about the problem was and mad that he was being such an idiot toward her. Page 75, Levin Jello. Faith sighed and shook her head. Damaston would be his new name from now on. That lasted about 5 months until Debbie with an eye relayed a story overheard in the management office about Don's pending eviction. The next morning, Carol was on the phone with Faith, listening to her mother talk about the happenings of the manor. They talked every day that they were not together to one of Faith's doctor's appointments. Faith had come on dependent to Carol to take her to the doctor, picked up groceries with Debbie with an eye was unable, and made phone calls for her when Faith wasn't up to it. The latest request from Faith was somewhat amusing to Carol. Faith wanted Carol to hire a cleaning company to take care of Don's apartment, thus allowing him to stay. She also wanted Carol to do it anonymously, which might not be so easy. Carol, being a retired teacher, had a former student who owned a cleaning company, and after some discussion, a haphazard plan came together. The cleaning woman would call Don and inform him he had won a contest. The prize was a free house cleaning. Faith was so happy that she could do something to help Don, but didn't want him to know it was taking care of her. Carol just rolled her eyes and made it necessary arrangements. She would never hear the end of it. She refused. A few days later, Carol got a call from a former student who explained that she could not do the job. She had called Don and set up a day to come to his apartment to clean. Don had page 76, Love and Jello. Don had hesitantly agreed, saying he had never won anything before. When the crew showed up to do the actual cleaning, they knocked on the door, but Don wouldn't open it and threatened to call the police to press charges if they didn't leave immediately. After a few failed attempts to get him to allow the crew to do what they had been hired to do, and being refused entry, they conceded defeat and left. Carol sighed and dialed her mother's cell to say the news of the aborted cleaning. Without it, Damaston had shot himself in the foot. Chapter 9, page 77, Love and Jello. This will be the last chapter I read before closing. And then I'll pick up on the third part in the next hour, which will probably be in a few days. Love and Jello, Chapter 9, Don Goes Home. In the days that followed, people at the manor were questioning Wayne about Pauline, but he didn't have any information about her condition. He had heard from Nadine that she would be back at the manor the following week. When asked about the kiss, he would just smile but say nothing. Inside, he was hopeful that when Pauline was well enough to get out of the hospital, she would return to the manor and she and Wayne could sort things out between them. Wayne hadn't dated anyone in a long time and had secretly admired Pauline for a while now. He couldn't tell her because she was a bit beyond the type woman he had known in the past. She was just amazing to him, and he knew chances were slim that she would show any interest in him since she had a guy online. All that had changed, and although Wayne was sorry he got her leg messed up, he was happy he had finally revealed his feelings to her, and kissing her was just the icing on the cake. He was a bit scared that she'd think him a fool and knew that they were not a good match intellectually, but she was hopeful she could see her way to clear the least entertain the idea of them being together in some way. Time would tell if that would happen. In the meantime, While he waited for her return, Wayne had other fish to fry, as like to think one of the evenings his mamma had always taught him was to be nice to people, even if they were meaner, in a bag full of snakes. When Wayne had heard the trouble of one of the residents was having, he just started to organize the rest of the group there, and at the moment was sitting in the common area with a few of them. Page 78, Love and Jello. Wayne, why should we help? One resident asked. Cause we do here. We got each other and need to help how we can. It's God's way. He wanted us to help our neighbor. Wayne said, while simultaneously eyeing a plate of cookies somehow had got brought to them. Wayne could see that they had raisins in them, which he didn't like much, but cookies were cookies. His statement about God's way brought a few amens and praise bees, and that was the end of the deciding to help or not. Wayne's reached for a cookie and said, "Oh, here's what I was thinking." For the next 15 minutes, they talked about the plan, possible problems, who would do what, and other ideas they had brought up. At this end of conversation, people knew what was needed and would spread the word to the rest of the residents. Wayne reiterated about how important that the resident was at the time the subject planned to find out. He grabbed another cookie and walked off to find Matt. Page 79, Love and Jello. Don was driving home from the Goodwill store and decided to stop at one of the local bars in town. He didn't feel like going to his empty apartment just yet. Maybe he would watch some TV in the common area if the cable was working. It seemed to go out at random times, and so far the cable company had not been able to figure out the problem. Don walked into the bar, which almost empty since it was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. He ordered a vodka and soda, which a bartender brought and set in front of him without much of the way of pleasantries. Don eyed, Don eyed her as she walked away. Probably having a bad day, she thought to himself. He watched the news on the TV behind the bar, only paying attention to the latest goings on in the state. His mind drifted back to an earlier time, and he thought of his mother, who had gone for many years by then. Don shuddered as he remembered all the craziness of his childhood and her mean streak. Sometimes was passed by normal, but other times she would either be staring off into space for hours at a time, or be flying to a rage for seemingly no reason. And Dawn would take the brunt of anger, which was later determined she was schizophrenic, but she rarely took her medication, so Dawn had used to being prepared for anything when they would return from page 82. This is the last page that I'll be reading before closing. No, page 80. This will be the last page I'll be reading before closing the video. And then I'll pick up on the rest of it from 81 to 145. I'll pick it in the other video. Then hopefully will be one more video. Love and Jello, page 80. School. He took care of her when he could from her when she was on a rant and spend as little time as at home as possible. He had plotted the day he would be free from her for a long time and had saved money to get away the day he graduated. He never returned to Michigan after that except for one time. He had called her on her birthday and she walked to him and to visit her, saying she was sick and probably wouldn't be around much longer. Don had finally agreed to go see her. Returning to Michigan after so long was somewhat bittersweet for Don. His childhood had been spent there, and his high school years were pretty good, all things considered. Henry Ford High had taught him well. He was smarter than most people he had met in the years since graduation. As Don arrived at his mother's rundown house, he almost turned around. Just seeing the house brought back unpleasant memories of his mother. If she hadn't come out onto the porch when he pulled up, he would have left and not looked back. The years had taken their toll on her. She had looked much thinner and moved a lot slower than Don had remembered. He had spent the evening with her, talking about various things he had done since their last time together. Eventually, his mother looked at him and said she understood why he had left when he did, and apologized for actions up to that point. And I'm going to quit right there. I sure appreciate y'all listening in. If you get a chance to purchase this book, it's called Love and Jello, and it's written by Kat Rothen Gogan and Matt Riffenberg. Thank you all for listening, and please stay tuned. Remember, hit that like button and subscribe. Thank you.